Hello, everyone, and welcome to Insights at DD Lynn Designs. This is DD Lynn, and I'm excited to share with you tips, tricks, and techniques to accelerate our journey in this magical ancient art of wire. So today I thought I'd share for beginners a single wire loop earring. I remembered when I first tried to do earrings a couple of years ago, I was very frustrated because I couldn't keep them symmetrical. So I think what's really important is measurements, but also, just take it easy on yourself and look around your house for things that you can use as tools. So to start, we're going to be using anything around your house that will give you about a 3-inch diameter that you can wrap your wire around. This is a cork, and so I know it's 3.25 inches, which is what I use to create this loop for this example earring. And here's another cork that's 2 inches. So anything around your house, you don't have to have a ring dowel or a wooden dowel. Whatever, just look around. You'd be surprised what you have. Anyways, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with 4.5 inches of wire, and I'm using 20 gauge dead soft that I buy from Rio Grande. And in each tutorial that I do, I'm always going to show some of the same tips and tricks and techniques because I never know who's watching and if they've seen them before. So to straighten this wire, because you can see that it's a little bent, we have two options. We can either use our wire straighteners, our little rubber flattening wire straighteners, or I find if the wire isn't too long and if you have a bench block, you can use that. I'm going to be using my 14 gauge Rio Grande 1-pound spool of wire to straighten my wire. And not only that, it hardens your wire. 20 gauge wire as beginners is what we typically start out with, either round or square. This is round, and it's much softer and more easy to manipulate. And that also adds to the fact that it's more easy to bend. So since we're making an earring hoop, I want to strengthen and harden that wire as well as straighten it. So I have exactly 9 inches of wire here. And all I'm going to do is take my spool, move my wire, and run it up and down my wire. Then I'm going to turn it around. And you can see that there's still a little bit of an arc here. And you can be super aggressive and fast with this. This is going to harden and straighten your wire. So there we have it. Beautiful piece of straight wire. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut it at the 4.5 inch mark because I know that this is a 9-inch piece of wire. And then I'm going to line my two wires up just to make sure they're even. I always like my wires even if I know, double pun there, I'm going to be cutting some of the length off. But I like to start with 2 even wires. Now, the easiest way I've found to do this to make something symmetrical is to wrap both your wires at the same time. So I'm going to take my cork, and because this is a tapered cork, I'm not going to be starting at the bottom, or I'm going to be spreading my wire out as I'm going up. So I'm going to start at the top, and I really encourage beginners to measure everything in the beginning. I didn't get that technique when I first started, so I was always asking wire artists that were so generous with their free tutorials to please tell me how far am I measuring back from the top, where do I start. I never knew those things, so I find it really important as beginners that you measure. So find the center of your wire. I'm going to eyeball mine, and I'm just going to go ahead and take both those wires at the same time, and I'm going to push the sides against my cork. And then I'm going to bring my wires up. And to make them center, I'm just going to push them over. And I'm going to be pushing these down a lot more. So maybe for you starting, you might want to do 5 inches of wire if you're using a 3-inch diameter. So now I have 2 symmetrical hoops. So the next thing I recommend that you do is if you have a hammering block, I'm not going to do this because mine's in the garage. I would recommend to harden this because, again, it's 20 gauge wire. These are earrings. Girls are going to be pulling them on and off their ears. I would harden this wire even more by hammering it with a rubber mallet, a rubber what do they call them, rawhide mallet, or if you want to really hammer it good, go ahead and use your chasing hammer. And I would hammer both of them at the same time so that you can keep symmetry between the two hoops. Because these are identical hoops, we're not having to worry about a left or right side. So we're just trying to make this a simple earring single wire hoop. So the next thing that we're going to do, and I have found that if you have 6-step baling pliers or hoop pliers or loop pliers, whatever you want to call them, this makes it really easy to keep symmetry with your bends. And since I know these are both the same length, and I know that both my hoops are the same, and don't worry about that little curve right in there, that's going to go away as soon as we make our loop. I find that it's easier to start off making your loops with a 6-step plier than it is with a standard, and you have to excuse my arm as I go in and out, a standard, God, my brain is going blank right now. A standard, can't think. Okay, but anyways, these are tapered pliers. So we don't know exactly, how sometimes in the beginning to stay exactly on a line. So either you have to measure with your measuring device exactly how big of a loop you want. So I know that I'm going to be making on my 6-step plier, a 3mm loop. So if all I've got is my chain nose or round nose, now that I remembered, tapered plier, then I might want to mark this so that my loops are identical on each. So if you don't have this particular little tool, it really come in handy. I would recommend getting it, but this is how I would mark my chain nose or round nose pliers exactly with my felt pen so that I made the exact same size loop each time. But if you have a 6-step plier, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, so I'm going to move on pretty quick, I would recommend that you use this so your loops are identical. So how we make our loops is I'm going to just move my wire back just to create a little opening there. And you always want to make sure that whatever direction you're rolling in, so I'm going to be rolling towards me, that the size that you want to use on your barrel is facing towards you and your wires in the middle. If you're rolling away from you, then you want to make sure, but if you roll away from you on this, it's going to bring your loop in. So we're not going to be doing that. We just need to remember this as a tool or a tip to have your barrel facing away from you, depending on which direction you're going to make your loop. Our loop is going to go away from us, like this. So I'm going to go ahead and stick my wire in between, and I want to make sure that I can't feel it in between the two barrels. And then I'm going to hold this as an anchor for support, but I'm not pressing super hard. And I'm going to go ahead and adjust my grip and turn my loop, gentle little movements inward until it touches my core wire or my loop wire. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and it's going to get a little out of shape, but don't worry about it because we're going to pull that in really easily. Now, the key when making earrings is you want to do each step with each earring at the same time. You don't want to complete a fully finished earring because then when you go to do the other one, you may not be able to figure out how you did that. So I always recommend that you do them at the same time. And there's our hoop. And then all I'm going to do is bring these in. It's going to change the shape a little bit, but that's okay. And as long as they're the same, which is why we do them at the same time. And then I'm just going to open that up a little bit because we're going to be putting a bead in there. So there's our first hoop. Then I'm going to do the same thing with this other side. I'm going to create a little opening so I can get my pliers in there. Now, I'm not going to be finishing 2 earrings. I just wanted to do the basics for you so that you understand that you need to always complete each step with each earring before you go on to the next. And then I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. I'm going to put my wire in between my 2 barrels, make sure I can't feel it. And then you're always going to have to adjust your wrist with your first turn in the loop, and then just gentle little turns until my wire is touching. And you can see that it's twisted or a little tweaked because, again, this is 20 gauge wire and I haven't hammered my wire. You're going to bend it out of shape. So then all I'm going to do is very gently start pushing this in, and we have pretty darn close two identical loops. Now, if you haven't hammered these, I would recommend then you take these into your garage or wherever you have your hammering block. I can't have one in here. My table isn't sturdy enough to take that, and everything would go flying off of it because this is my workstation in my house. So, anyways, I would go and hammer these. And always remember when you're hammering to hold whatever you have together so it doesn't change the shape of it at the top if you're hammering like this. Okay, so now we're going to add our bead. So the next thing I'm going to do is get my 28 gauge wire, because as beginners, we typically start with a weaving wire, which is 28 gauge. I don't recommend 30 gauge as a beginner because it's really fine and it snaps a lot easier, and we tend to pull a lot harder as beginners and really crank down on our wire. So I would always start with the 28 gauge weaving wire, and until you feel really good weaving with that, then I would move up to a 26. But anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and take about 6 to 7 inches of wire. I don't really need that much, but as a beginner, we need to have some working wire, and too much wire can make it difficult for us, and not enough can make it difficult for us. So I've went ahead and cut myself 7 inches of wire, and as you can see, I used a kyanite gemstone bead on this one, and I have a copper bead on this one, and I'm going to also teach you how to make this decorative earring hook. And so all we're going to do is be wrapping our wires around one side, and then you're going to do the same thing with your other hoop. Remember, you want to do both hoops at the same time, and then we're going to add our bead and wrap our wire around the other. And yes, it's going to move, but that's okay. That's a really cute little dangly look. But this, again, is just a simple way to make a quick single wire ear hoop. So on this one, I'm going to be adding this little 3mm Swarovski crystal, and I've already cut my jump rings, and we'll talk about those in a second. And I have 3mm jump rings here, and they're 20 gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my tail. And I have about, I'm going to say, a 2-inch tail. And I'm going to just go ahead and start with my tail on the outside of, I'm going to call this my front. And I'm going to make, you can make as many as you want. I'm going to make 10 rotations. I'd like to see 10 wraps. And all I'm doing is taking my wire, wrapping it around, swinging it under that opening, that gap, and bringing it back around. And you always kind of want to let go of your wire a little bit so that you're not yanking on it. So that's 5. I'm going to do 5 more. That's 6, 7, 8, 9, and that's 10. Now I want my wire in the back, and I'm going to go ahead and just push this up and snug it up there, because I'm going to bring my bead around the back, and you can make this your front if you want. And I'm lining up where I think my bead needs to be, but I'll make adjustments anyways. And now I'm going to go ahead and pick up my crystal and let her slide down. And I'm losing my voice. Just dropped it off there because I was looking through my camera. And I'm just going to bring my bead around the back, and you can see that I kind of want it sitting pretty close to the top. But if you wanted to add more beads, then this would be the time to do it. So if you had little tiny beads that were smaller than this 3mm, you could certainly add those at this time. But just for the sake of keeping it simple, I'm going to leave my bead right there. Now, You're going to have space between this bead, and that's okay. It's going to be kind of floating or sliding back and forth, but we just want to be able to make 2 symmetrical earring beads. So now, instead of going up, we're going to go down because we want to make sure that our wires are the same in the same place on each side. So we're going to have to really pull that in. And now we're going to be pushing that wire through and grabbing it the other side. And so now we've got our little bead hanging there and anchored off. And then I'm going to do 10 wraps. So that's 1, 2, 3, and I'm pushing my wire in. I'm not yanking it, I'm pushing it. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I want my wire to be on the back where the other one left off. And so now this is where I'm going to check, and I'm going to say, okay, I like where it's at. Looks like I've got 10 wraps on each side. So I'm going to go ahead and trim my wire. Now, if you wanted more wraps down your frame, then you would just go ahead and continue. And we don't have an even amount of wire on each side, so you might want to count here. I'm going to do 5 wraps here and 5 wraps there until you get to the closer to the end, and then you know where to stop. So you don't run out of wire, is what I'm trying to say. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and cut my wire. So here's another tip on how to cut your wire so it's not sitting on top of either side of the frame. So if this was the front and this was the back, we don't want our wire sitting here because it might poke. So we want to actually cut our wire on the inside of the frame. So the little tip here is to lift your wire up so you can get up underneath it, and then you want to have really sharp nippers. And I'm going to come almost to the outside of where that wire is on the other side of the frame, and I'm going to snip it off. And by the way, everyone, and I'm going to mention this in every video, these are the most awesome snippers. They're high stainless steel gauge, and they're really inexpensive, and I bought them a little less than 2 years ago. I haven't eaten into my blade, and I've actually used these on 16 gauge wire. Don't recommend that, but they are so sharp and super pointed, and I can get into the smallest area. So I'll put a link down below, and I don't get commission for this. I just think these are the most awesome nippers, and I've spent a lot of money on nippers, and for $9-11, you just can't go wrong. So anyways, I've cut my wire to where it's sitting right above and on the inside of this loop. And now I'm going to get you can use chain nose, needle nose, and I am going to roll that wire as I snug it down. So where it's actually on the inside of the hoop. So it's not sitting on top on either side. I can't feel it. And that was a hard thing for me in the beginning, is how to know where to cut that wire. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to lift up on this wire a little bit, because you want to lift up on it so that you cut it to where you know you want it to be. And so if I cut it right here on the top of this wire, then it's going to wrap around here and it's going to end up on the other side, and you're going to be able to feel it. My goal here is to hide it. So I'm going to come back into that wire, almost as if I'm cutting on the inside of it, because I want to hide it. I don't want it to sit on top. And that looks like it's a little close, because remember, meaning too close to the top, I want this wire to sit on the inside of the loop. There goes Matt, honey. And then I'm going to snug it down to where it's still hiding inside of there. So now we have our darling little dangle crystal dropping from our hoop. And by now you could have added more wire, or you could have put another little drop down here on the bottom, or you hammered it. If you want to change your shape at all, this is the time to do it. If you want it more rounded, then I would take my 2-inch. If I don't want an oval look, I would take my 2-inch cork in diameter and I would push that wire up. This is presuming that you haven't hammered it, because if you've hammered it, you're not going to be able to take the shape, change the shape. So anyways, I now have my hoop. I'm almost done. So what I've done here is I've cut 3 jump rings, and I've used 20 gauge wire, and I've used the 3mm side, or the second step of my bail making pliers. Okay, so we're going to attach these 3 jump rings to the 2 hoops so that we can attach our ear hook. Now you can wire off on the top. You don't have to, meaning you can wrap wires on the top. You don't have to. That's a little bit more difficult for me for beginners. So I didn't do that. I wanted to keep it simple here for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just attach our jump rings. So I'm going to take my jump rings, and I have already closed off one jump ring here, and that's what you're going to want to do. And then I'm going to take my open jump ring, and I'm going to attach the closed jump ring, and I'm going to attach the open jump ring to my loop. And then I'm going to close this jump ring up. So now I have 2 jump rings, and this is going to be my center jump ring, and this is very fiddly to see. So as you can see, this is going to be my center jump ring right here. So I'm going to put my next loop, jump ring in this loop, and I'm going to attach it to that closed jump ring. I'm going to adjust my camera here, folks, so that hopefully you can see this a little bit better. So I'm putting this through the loop and then putting it through the loop of that jump ring, because that's going to, and I got to make sure these are in here right, be my center jump ring where I'm going to attach my ear hook. So now I have my 3 jump rings attached, and yes, I use my fingers a lot, and then I'm going to use my pliers to really snug that up. So now I have my 3 jump rings attached, and as you can see here, that's going to be my center. And now I've even embellished more on this hoop. It looks so cute to me with those 3 little jump rings on there, because it just looks like something else, as a different part of the design of the earring. And now I'm going to teach you how to make a fish hook, earring hook. So we're going to go ahead, and I've already cut myself 2.5 inches of 20 gauge wire. And I've already straightened my wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want it a little more decorative, and you can make a loop like this, or you can just tuck it in like I have here, versus the standard ear hook is just 1 loop. And I like some decorative design. So I'm going to do a swirl ear hook design, and I'm going to take my needle nose, and I am going to kind of flatten that tip a little bit. I'm pushing on it and squeezing it because I really want to have a closed end. So I'm using my pliers to kind of splice, or not splice, but flatten this. And as I'm doing that, I'm turning the pliers towards me. And the reason why I'm not using round nose is because my wire will slip more, and I'm going to be closing that loop anyways. So I've found that if I do this in little movements, I can really get a sharp curl on that. And then I'm going to go ahead and take this and start to curl it in. This lip here. Okay, see how I'm getting a curl on that? And then I'm going to get a wider jaw plier. I'm going to be using my flat nose here because you'll be chasing your round wire. And I want to close that loop in a little bit. So I'm grabbing that loop and I'm kind of squeezing it into itself. Can you see that in there? You have more control with your flat nose and a wider jaw to start closing up a loop. And then I'm going to take my chain nose and I'm just going to turn her in, and I'm doing a push movement because I really want, and I'm smashing down pretty good. Don't worry about that. We're going to file this because I really want a closed loop, and we don't want too many swirls because it'll be too big for the ear hook. But my goal is to really close that up. And as you can see, and I'm using pressure, and I'm flattening this wire as I go, but I'm really closing that loop. And I want to make about 2 rotations. So as my loop comes around to the top, I'll consider that 1 full rotation there. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring her in. And you can stop anywhere you want. And she's now at the top again. So I would look at that as 2 rotations. So we have 1 here. Let me get something thinner. Let me get my wire. So we have 1 rotation here, and then 2 rotations. So I've now created my decorative loop, and here's another tip and trick. And a lot of times people freak, and I'm going to say this in every video, not to. I'm going to use the 180 grit side of my nail file, and I use nail files that I get really inexpensive online on Amazon or wherever I can get them. And I'm going to go ahead and file this down and create a brushed copper look. And not only that, when I patina it, the texture in the copper wire is going to create some really cool highlights and lowlights. And it will also appear as if we've hammered our wire. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, because I always do both sides, even if I know which is going to be the back. I want them to equally look as clean and nice. Now, if you wanted it more shiny, then you can just get your buffing block. I have buffing blocks, and go ahead and shine it up. Or you can use your Dremel, whatever you have. I don't know if you have a Dremel. I didn't have a drill right away as a beginner. So now I'm going to make my loop, and you want to make sure that you do both of your wires at the same time so that your loops match. So now I'm going to take my pliers, and my 6-step pliers, and I'm going to use the smallest, and I'm going to line my loop, my little hoop or swirl, right at the top of this, okay? So it's completely flush with these pliers. And I'm going to make my first little tiny loop straight up, against that swirl. So this is what you should have, because this is where we're going to hang our earring from. So for an example, just so that you can get an idea of where you're going with all of this, I'm going to take this and I'm going to I'm using the center jump ring and I'm going to slide it down. So this is where we are going with this. So I'm going to take that off. Now I'm going to use my 5th step. So 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm sorry, yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to use my 5th step because that to me is like the perfect hoop size for an earring. And again, I'm going to stick my ear hook that I have so far flush with both these ends. And you know what? I'm going to flatten that so that it's okay. Okay, can you see that? So this is flush, and I actually want to turn it this way. I want it flush against, no, I'm sorry, guys. And you can also do it this way. You can do it down from the bottom. You can turn your earring this way, and it might be easier this way for you to just push your wire over. So this is the bottom of my plier, and I'm going to be wrapping this wire around the number 5 step, and all I'm going to do is push it around, and I'm going to snug it right into that wire there. And then I'm going to take it off. And I have my very decorative earring hook. And then I would go to the garage and I would get my hammering block and I would hammer the arc to really harden it here and maybe just a little bit down here. And then I would take my pliers and just bend this out a little bit. And if you have a tumbler, you don't need to file these ends, but if you don't have a tumbler, you will need to file these smooth with a really soft file. Anyways, you now have this darling little ear hook. And then it's decorative. And then all I'm going to do is take my earring. I'm going to slide it on my ear hook. And then I am going to close this back. So I'm going to take my pliers and I'm going to squeeze that in like so. And there you have it, this darling little single wire hoop earring. Anyways, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I'm new at tutorials and videos, so bear with me as I go through this process, and I'm so grateful and appreciative to all the wire artists out there that have been incredibly generous during my journey and the continuation of my journey in the ancient art of wire, spending their time and professionalism of editing and hours of creating the most phenomenal tutorials. And my goal is to constantly share tips, tricks, and techniques to beginners to really accelerate that journey for you, because I have to tell you, it's everything in this ancient art. Watch for technique. Look for those tips and tricks that will just really help you so much. So if you like this tutorial or you want to see different things or have questions about it, please make a comment and subscribe down below. You can follow me at DD Designs, that's DESIGNS.com, or Facebook.com, DD Lynn Designs. Thank you so much, everyone. Remember to be kind. It travels 1,000,000 miles. And have a wonderful, magical, fabulous day. Bye for now.